Chapter 8, A History Lesson. As he had every Friday morning since the school year began, Mr. Jupiter said, "Let's begin by reviewing some American history. I trust everyone read last night's assignment." And as always, Bernadette fidgeted. Melvin ducked his head behind his left knee, and Calvin quickly looked at Stanford. "I bet the human computer did." Stanford was as red as the Mongolian caftan Mr. Jupiter was wearing. I was so absorbed in my studies that I ran out of time." "Huh?" asked Ham. "My stamp collection," translated Stanford. "Oh," said Ham, "I get it." Mr. Jupiter sighed. "Didn't anyone study their history lesson last night?" No one raised a hand. "Then I guess there's no reason to talk about this," said Mr. Jupiter. He whisked back the cloth off his desk to reveal a set of big yellow teeth. A jumble of rustling wires and rotting springs held the teeth together. "Ooh, what is that?" asked Missy. "George Washington's dentures," replied Mr. Jupiter. Dentures are like fake teeth. "They were given to me by one of the International Tooth and Gum Associations for inventing floss on a stick." The children gathered around for a closer look. "I didn't even know George Washington wore dentures," Ham finally said. Mr. Jupiter nodded. "Poor George had terrible teeth. They kept rotting and falling out, and by the time he became president, he only had one tooth remaining in his mouth. That is why he had to wear dentures." "Is that true?" asked Lenny. He poked the teeth suspiciously. "These don't even look like my grandpa's dentures." "Of course they don't," said Mr. Jupiter. "There weren't any modern dental methods back then, so people had to make dentures out of some pretty odd things. Washington's dentures are made from cow and hippopotamus teeth." Lenny rolled his eyes. "You're telling me that George Washington walked around with hippo in his mouth? I don't believe it." Mr. Jupiter shrugged. "No? Then I guess there's no more reason to talk about this either." And he pulled a long ivory toothbrush out of his desk drawer. "I suppose you're going to tell us that that's George Washington's toothbrush," said Lenny. "No," replied Mr. Jupiter. "I'm going to tell you that this is George Washington's horse's toothbrush." "Huh?" asked Ham. "Our first president obviously learned from his dental mistakes," explained Mr. Jupiter. "On his orders, each of his 6 white horses had its teeth brushed every morning. According to Martha Washington, the horse's breath smelled better than her husband's." Everyone laughed but Lenny. "I don't think that's very funny, Mr. Jupiter," he cried. "You shouldn't make up historical facts." "How do you know they're made up?" asked Mr. Jupiter. "Because history is boring," answered Lenny. "There is no laughing in history." "Sure there is," replied Mr. Jupiter. "History is full of funny stories, as well as daring adventures and heroic deeds. Of course you won't read your book." He shook his head and sighed. "That is so sad." He let his words sink in the moment before clapping his hands. "Everyone return to your desk and take out your rock picks. It's time for mineralogy." Lenny shrugged and slid back to his chair. Opening the lid of his desk, he peered past the spitball collection and the rubber tarantula to the never-opened history book in the back. "Funny stories, huh?" he muttered to himself. Using his rock pick to excavate the book, he slipped it into his backpack. Excavate means to get or to dig it out. Moral of the story is incentive spurs effort. Incentive spurs effort. What do you think that means? Think about it, write it down on your slide, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Thanks.